Chapter 5, The Art of Presentation by Ray Hall, Ph.D. As I said in Chapter 1, you are the artist. The stage or meeting room is your canvas. What you do with it is up to you. You can wow your audience by creating a masterpiece, or you can put them to sleep. Which do you choose? Of course, you want to create a masterpiece and wow your audience. Why wouldn't you? But sometimes I find people who would rather hide behind the podium for the duration of their presentation and then at the conclusion attempt to creep off of the stage unseen. Hopefully that's not you. It isn't always necessary to try to create a masterpiece, but we can create something that is acceptable, something that is good, and something that is liked and enjoyed. It doesn't have to be perfect to wow the audience, but it does need to be good. I have given well over 800 presentations at conferences and conventions over the past 20 years. That's nearly 2 or more a month on the average. Occasionally, I am asked to give 3 or 4 presentations over a 2-day period. The most I have been asked to give involved 3 different 1-hour presentations in a consecutive 3-hour period. I have done that several times, and by the 3rd presentation, I must admit that I have to do my best to bring myself up to my full capacity and say with enthusiastic feeling, "It is great to be here," and mean it. Being an actor or actress helps. To be a sought-after public speaker, an important addition to your repertoire of skills includes having some actor or actress within us. I tell my audiences that it is important to have a little bit of Fred Astaire, the wonderful dancer and actor, the great French actor Maurice Chevalier, and a touch of Marcel Marceau, the great French mime. That's a great deal to ask, but it takes at least a little of that to become a great public speaker. To prepare myself to be the best public speaker I could possibly be, beside the fact that I was a severe stutterer from my early childhood into adulthood, I auditioned for every play I could find and was asked to join the casts of plays with greater and greater frequency as the months and years passed. I made it into the casts of murder mysteries, musical comedy, Shakespearean plays, and a number of humorous and dramatic theatrical shows. I even made it into dinner theater, which I really didn't enjoy because rehearsals generally began at 10 p.m. after the performances were over for the evening. I took tap dancing and auditioned to be a member of a dance team that engaged in stage dance and jazz ballet. I sang in musical comedy on stage, sang solos for talent shows, sang in madrigal groups for musical competitions, formed a gospel quartet that was popular and still is, and sang solos in stage shows. When I was in high school and early college, I requested and was granted the opportunity by a local radio station to host my own radio show and was a rock and roll disc jockey for 5 years. I also did news broadcasts and commercials during and after I went off the air from my show. This list could go on. What I'm trying to say here is that in order to prepare yourself to be better than a good speaker, it is important to prepare yourself to feel comfortable in front of an audience. Bad experiences can help us too. One of the worst experiences in which I found myself while trying to prepare myself to feel comfortable in front of an audience was while I was in high school. I auditioned to be the lead in a 1-act play, a murder mystery that required the lead actor to straddle a chair that was turned around with the back of the chair toward the audience. With arms folded over the back of the chair, it was the responsibility of the actor to talk to the audience, a 5-minute soliloquy with a spotlight directed on him about why he committed the dastardly act that was the plot of the play. My drama coach told me that I could have the part if I promised not to stutter at all. One of the worst things you can tell a stutterer. I told her with confidence that I could. However, I had no idea that I actually could because I was still a stutterer. But I stood by my promise and said my lines with such force that it masked my stuttering. Thankfully, the 1-act play was held only one night, because I question whether I could have done it well twice. Well, I did it and received applause at the conclusion of my soliloquy. It was a great night for a stutterer, giving me confidence to continue on my way to greater fluency. We must prepare ourselves. We have to prepare ourselves to feel comfortable in front of an audience. That means sometimes placing ourselves in uncomfortable situations in front of the public, whether it be singing, acting, dancing, or engaging in disc jockey patter between songs on the radio. But many people are not singers, dancers, have the opportunity to act on stage, or be a radio announcer. So we look for other ways to practice our stage presence and speaking ability. There are always other ways, other outlets. That means finding avenues for public speaking, or at least exposure to the public. They can be things like reading scripture for church services, making announcements at meetings, giving the treasurer's report for the organization to which you belong, giving the announcements for the next week's activities, volunteering to introduce the guest speaker at your organization's monthly meetings, moving up the presentation ladder by giving a brief presentation at your next state conference or convention. There are many ways through which we can give ourselves confidence in the arena of public speaking. Toastmasters clubs are a wonderful way to engage in public speaking in a relatively non-threatening environment. Let's talk about organizing your presentation so that the audience will applaud when you conclude your remarks. Not applauding because you are finally finished, but rather that you did a great job and inspired them. Too Good presents some excellent suggestions. They are, number 1, begin with the ending. Instead of beginning with, "Today I'd like to speak about," give the audience the premise of your presentation. For example, as I was walking from my car to this auditorium this afternoon, I noticed a young man sitting on the sidewalk next to this very building. He was holding a styrofoam cup in his hand, asking for money to buy food. He was a nice-looking young man, and certainly seemed to have the potential to be doing something more than begging for money. Reluctantly, I did place $2 in his cup, smiled somewhat sheepishly, but his situation was a perfect example of what I came to talk with you about today: rebuilding the industrial infrastructure of our city that will increase the opportunity for jobs for those in our community who have the ability to work. That young man obviously seemed able to work. I asked him if he had a job. His only response was that he could not find work. He had looked, but now it had come down to begging for money for the purpose of buying food. That beginning had a much greater impact than "I have come to you today to discuss the industrial infrastructure of our city." With that introduction, audible snoring will probably be heard within the first 15 minutes of your presentation. Of course, you are not always going to find the perfect example waiting for you outside of the building where you will be speaking. But what I am saying here is that an example used for the purpose of beginning your presentation, or a story to exemplify in a more dramatic way what you came to say, is a perfect way to begin your presentation. You are sounding a wake-up call to your audience, grabbing their attention so that they will continue listening to you. Another example comes from a class that was entitled "The New Testament, History and Social Climate" that I took while I was an undergraduate in college. The professor walked into our class on the first day and, without pausing, began by saying in all seriousness, "The course for which you have enrolled is about a girl, only about 13 years of age, who, in about the year 1 BC, got herself pregnant and made up a spectacular story about being visited by an angel whose name was Gabriel, who said that she would become pregnant without actually having sex. She called it an immaculate conception, and people believed her. After giving birth to a baby boy, her story has remained to this day, and as a result, many books have even been written about it, including half of the Bible. And the birth even eventually developed a new religion called Christianity, all from that story she created in order to keep from getting herself in trouble, or in that era, put to death." The class was taught at a conservative church-supported college. The course was taught primarily for those who were pre-ministerial students. When the professor finished that introduction, most of the students in the classroom had eyes about the size of $50, mouths open, wondering what had prompted a professor who was a scholar of religious history to tell such a preposterous story. The professor finally admitted that he was just kidding, of course, but it certainly grabbed everyone's attention. From that point on, the course centered on debunking his initial theory of the nativity that he had simply told in jest. And it worked. In other words, the best way to grab your audience is to give them a wake-up call, something that is going to grab their attention and hold it while you build into your presentation. It works, and you will be considered a better public presenter than you thought you were. Number 2, use a quotation to begin your presentation. The following is an example that is worth sharing here. That is, in the right setting, a good quote that actually helps make your point can be what your presentation needs. Here is the example. Thomas Jefferson once said that the great joy of being an American is simply having freedom of choice. Well, I am sure that if Jefferson were alive today, he would certainly agree that at no time in our history have we had more chance to choose our future opportunities. I'm talking about the abundance of opportunities that await us. Such a quote will not only alert the audience to the topic of your presentation, but will also give it life. You have used a quote that is not only trustworthy because it comes from Thomas Jefferson, but one that leads to the topic of your presentation. Number 3, use a rhetorical question. This seems to not only bring an audience to attention, perhaps another wake-up call, but also can lead nicely into your presentation. Something like, why aren't we, as a society, accepting the fact that we live in a world in which Caucasians are becoming the racial minority? As we develop our businesses or develop new industry, are we keeping this fact at the forefront of our thinking? Why should we? The answer is this. A good rhetorical question will not only alert the audience to what you will be talking about, but will start them thinking about why, and they will be listening to you to find the answer. 4, project into the future. Steve Jobs said it wonderfully when he declared, "The ones who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones who do." He did indeed change the world into what we know today. He was a seer, one who looked into the future and saw possibilities that others did not see. Too Good gives a good example of how to look into the future and grab your audience. 30 years from now, the company you work for probably will not exist. Now, that would be a great wake-up call to an audience of business people. 5, look into the past. Use an example of what existed in the past and how that will, in all probability, impact our future. There are similarities and differences in our history that can impact us in the future. Take, for example, global warming. 50 years ago, there was no mention of melting glaciers and rising oceans and the impact it could have on the states such as Florida and California. If a speaker who is addressing a conference on the business climate in Miami, Florida, began his speech by saying, "If nothing is done to combat global warming, Miami, Florida will probably be underwater by the year 2025. What will that do to the business climate in Miami? Businesses won't exist." That would certainly get the attention of those in attendance at the conference. It may have been a more dramatic first statement than one wants to hear. However, if that possibility did exist, it would make a great impact on the audience. 6, humor. Some of the poorest beginnings to a speech involve humor. If you're not Bob Hope or Jerry Seinfeld, then don't risk it. A bad joke is not an icebreaker, but it can certainly break up an otherwise potentially impressive presentation, no pun intended. If you're going to use a humorous story to begin a speech, tell it as though it is true. Don't tell it as a joke. It can reduce the effectiveness of your presentation more than almost any other thing you can do. Remember, the beginning of your speech is an extremely important component of your presentation. Make it a powerful introduction, one that the audience will remember even if they don't remember anything else you say. And 7, never begin with an apology. Never begin with an apology such as, "I've never been much of a public speaker, but," or, "As I was driving over here today, I was trying to decide what I'm going to say and wasn't able to come up with anything strikingly brilliant. Well, but I'll give it a try anyway." I think I would consider leaving the auditorium at that point, wouldn't you? Let's talk now about presenting your speech. In Chapter 1 of this book, I spoke to the topic of fear as it pertains to making public presentations. I'm not going to reiterate that topic, but a statement by Steve Brown is pertinent here. He paraphrases an old saying, "Cowards die 1,000 deaths because they are constantly visualizing their dying." He continues by saying, "It is the same way with speeches. If you persist in visualizing your speech bombing, even if it doesn't, you will have at least gone through the experience. Instead, visualize your speech being a tremendous success, and it very well may be one. Remember, success does breed success. The more you experience success in the process of speech making, and if you take it seriously, the better you will become." What does it take to be an exceptional presenter? That sounds like a very tough task. But if we want to be one, we need to know what is involved. According to Kegel, an exceptional presenter is, number 1, organized. Exceptional presenters take charge. They look poised and polished. They sound prepared. They are not there to waste time. Their goal is not to overwhelm, but to inform, persuade, influence, entertain, or enlighten. Their message is well structured, well organized, and clearly defined. Number 2, passionate. Exceptional presenters exude enthusiasm and conviction. If the presenter doesn't look and sound passionate about her or his topic, why should anyone else be passionate about it? Exceptional presenters speak from the heart and leave no doubt as to where they stand. Their energy is persuasive and contagious. 3, engaging. Exceptional presenters do everything in their power to engage each member of the audience. They build rapport quickly and involve the audience early and often. If you want respect, you must first connect. Number 4, natural. An exceptional presenter style is natural. Their delivery has a conversational feel. Natural presenters make it look easy. They appear comfortable with the audience. A presenter who appears natural appears confident. 5, understand your audience. Kegel stresses, as I stated earlier, that as an exceptional presenter you must understand your audience. He states that exceptional presenters learn as much as they can about their audience before presenting to them. The more you know about your audience, the easier it will be to connect and engage. 6, owning the room. He continues by talking about owning the room. Owning the room, a phrase that I have used previously, is a term that describes stage actors and comedians. For example, who can work the stage with absolute confidence? She owns the room. Owning the room is what will happen for you once you have developed an open communication style. You will present with confidence and maintain the highest level of professionalism even in the most challenging circumstances. I referred to Bill Clinton earlier in this book. He is an example of where good presentation skills can take you. In both his 1992 and 1996 presidential campaigns, he truly outscored both George H. Bush and Bob Dole. According to Kegel, from the first question of his first presidential debate, Bill Clinton owned the room. When the first question was directed to him, he looked the woman who asked it straight in the eye and asked her to tell him her name. Somewhat surprised, she told him. Then he answered her question. He was confident, and he was connecting with them. And those who were asking the questions knew it. The poorest public speakers. It is interesting to me that among the poorest public speakers seem to be those who are professionally presenting on stage at conferences and conventions. They typically appear to exhibit the poorest posture, the poorest stage presence, the poorest use of the microphone, and the poorest use of voice and speech patterns. They are difficult to understand. They speak so rapidly that a typical central nervous system cannot keep up with their sentence utterances, and they speak as though they are afraid to use the microphone properly or were never taught how to use it. They are the ones who know most about what they are presenting. They know the subject matter, and one would think that they would present in such a way that those in the audience would not have to struggle to hear and understand what they are saying, or, as I said earlier, not have to struggle to stay awake. The problem is that the majority of professionals in many fields have never been taught how to present information to an audience. The ability to be a polished public speaker might seem to them as something that comes naturally, without practice or rehearsal, or worst of all, as something that doesn't require instruction on the fine points of presenting in public. The remaining chapters of this book will present important information on topics that are critical to your effectiveness as a public speaker, including 1, the art of using a microphone, 2, the art of stage presence and manner of presentation, and 3, the art of concluding your presentation, making an impact. These are all critical elements that will give you the skills to become a polished public speaker. Again, presenting in public is a performing art. As I, in so many words, said earlier in this chapter, you are the artist, and the stage is your canvas. You are the one who can create a masterpiece. I know you can do it.